think one of the hardest things in the world is when you have an adult child who's struggling with a life that's falling apart. And whatever that might be, there's all different ways that people's lives fall apart. And I think our culture is particularly hard because there's so many ways to go wrong now. You know, there's so many choices that you see your adult children take that you know are going to affect them for the rest of their life. I remember when I was, I think I was 20 years old. I had left home at the age of 18. My father was a pastor. I told him that I didn't believe in Christ or the church, and I wasn't going to have anything to do with it. It was very devastating to my family. And my father was very much in charge of all of us. We were all kind of afraid of him. He never shared with us any of his own sins. But he came to me after about 2 years and said to me, "Well, is there something you have against me?" And I said to him, "What I have against you is that you've never been wrong, and you always try to control us all." And he looked at me and he said, "I'm really sorry." That really changed my relationship with my father. I didn't become a Christian that day, that year, that month, but it totally changed the way I viewed him. And my mother also was able to come to me a couple of years later and tell me about her own struggles with faith and how much she needed Christ every day and how she acted how she struggled every day to know God's love and to not act like she was alone in the world. Those are the things that caught my attention as somebody that didn't know Christ. It's really your deepest need for your child is not that they clean up their behavior and become a higher functioning non-Christian. Their deepest need is really for them to know Christ. So if you can honestly and humbly share your relationship with Jesus with them as much as they would allow, that's something that is not going to, that's something that's going to have a great deal of impact in their life. Another thing that meant a lot to me in my relationship with my parents was that their lives didn't stop because my life did, and their faith didn't stop, and they didn't stop going and following Christ themselves. You know, at that point, my father was a pastor. He had a growing church. He decided he was spending part of every year in Uganda. Like, these are the things that caught my attention, because it was different than what the people around me were doing. Like, my parents were actually living out their faith in front of me. And I guess that's something that I think that is available to all of us. We should be doing that in any case. But often your children, if they have really turned away from Christ and are living a life far from Christ, the only Christians they're going to know are you and your husband if he's a Christian as well. So the only life that they can read, what difference does Jesus make, is going to be our lives. That doesn't make us responsible for their salvation. The only person that can change a human heart is the Spirit. You have to view your child and your child's faith as part of a bigger picture of the kingdom, and that God is going to answer your prayers, and you're going to have to depend upon God to answer those prayers in His time and in His way. Many times God gives us the ability to look back and say, that was at just the right time. In my case, I was so far from God, and yet He was never far from me, and I was never out of His plan for me. I was working as a waitress and going to school, and I happened to meet the bartender where I was waitressing, and we happened to go out. This is a man that I never ever would have met if I hadn't been in that exact same place at that exact same time. His name is Angelo Giuliani. We became married. God did work in my life. I did become a Christian. Nobody thought that he would ever become a Christian. He did 6 weeks later. He became a pastor, and now he's a church planner and the director of Swaziland Relief. So I know that makes it seem like God just ties everything up into a neat little bow, but He does give us those stories so that we can see, we get a glimpse of how His plans are being worked out in the messy details of our lives, and that gives us hope. The same God that planned for the exact right time, for thousands upon thousands of years, for Jesus to be born, as Galatians says, when the time had fully come, then Jesus Christ was born. That same God is the one who's in charge of our lives and our child's lives. He's faithful then, he's faithful now, and he will be faithful.